I got the news that Kotlin 1.9.20 had come out, and I went to check it out. While sitting on my couch, I used my mobile phone to search for the new features. On their website, I found the release notes, and I was about to select option 1.9.20 when I realized that there was already a release 2.2.0 beta. But version 1.9.20 had just come out. How do we already have 2.0.0 beta? Already? And because I am curious, I left the 1.9.20 section behind and went straight into the 2.0.0 beta section. I immediately saw this huge buzzword, well, 2 letters, K2. What is this K2 anyways? Do I need to download something special? Am I going to have the same bytecode? But I already have all my applications running in the cloud. Will this have any effect on my applications now? Do I need another feature? And why is this going to be mandatory? And what about security? Do I need a pen test? Another one? K2 is big. K2 is a second-generation Kotlin compiler that brings with it the promise of simplicity and faster compilation times. But even after seeing presentations about this topic, I still wanted to check for myself if the K2 compiler holds up to these claims. Oh, and about those questions, my personal feeling is that not much will change, if anything at all, when it comes to local runs, integration pipelines, or deploy pipelines. Having said that, we are going to test drive a K2 compiler version that is not yet production ready. In both Kotlin versions where the K2 compiler is available, 1.9.20 and 2.0.0 beta, the K2 compiler is not production ready. It is, however, test drive ready, and that is what we are going to do. In one of their videos, Google states that the Kotlin compiler version 1.8 is able to compile 3,000 lines of code per second. That is 3 klocs. And the new version, the K2 compiler, is able to compile 6,000 lines of code per second. That is 6 klocs per second. To create a test with some level of reliability, I've created a script that is going to generate our own Kotlin code with 6,000 lines of dummy code. It's just a code that does nothing but print out something to the console. Let's have a look at that and how that works. But let me first show you the example that I have created. So for that, we go here and then YouTube sessions, long videos, and then K2 compiler. If we look at the sources, we can see that I have created a K2 test script, and this test script has the entry point of our executable, and there we are calling run, which is part of a mega class. This mega class is the class that we are going to generate dynamically via our makefile. And as you can see, it only says lines of code. It prints this to the console 6,000 times. These 6,000 lines of code should take 1 second to compile with the K2 compiler, and they should take more than that, up to 2 seconds, with the K1 compiler, in this case version 1.9. The way I am creating these lines of code dynamically is using a makefile, and in the makefile we have a complete bash script that is going to execute at each one of the runs of the bash executor prompt. It creates first all the necessary lines for our class, that is the package, the declaration of the class, the companion object, and then the function run. And then it will run 6,000 times the same print line code, and then it will close all the curly brackets. Also, because we need to make reliable tests, they all need to start from scratch in every different run. And I will have to run them about 10 times just to see if the results are consistent with each other. And another thing that is important to note is that every time we build this code, it will create a build folder. If that build already exists, then optimizations will be kickstarted, and then we don't get a reliable result. So what we need to do for our tests is to remove the build every time we try with the old compiler or with the K2 compiler. And for that, I've created a script that does exactly that. So let's look at it. It's located right over here in benchmark. So this is a bash script, and this bash script will perform our automated benchmark tests. It will loop 10 times over the same kind of execution, where in the first half, the execution will run the ordinary build with the Kotlin compiler version 1.9, and in the second half, it will run the K2 compiler. In the first half, it will create our build using the compiler version 1.9, and in the second half, it will create our build using compiler version 2. And it will register the measured execution times plus the iteration number in a file called stats.csv in a comma-separated value format. You probably noticed that I'm constantly using this file, build_original.txt. This is in order to be able to switch from configuration to configuration. And the build_original text file is simply the original Gradle file that we are using without any K2 configuration on it. The K2 configuration is located here in K2 config.kts, and this file contains the actual configuration node necessary to activate the version 2 of the compiler. So this way we can guarantee that when we want to use the original file, we only copy the original text file, build_gradle.original.txt to build_gradle.kts, and when we want to activate the K2 version, we simply echo it to the end of the build_gradle.kts file. In our make file, we also have a perform benchmark script, which only calls benchmark.sh. And if we do this, we can already start our benchmark test. Let's try it and see what happens when we run the benchmark test that is going to test the difference in runtime when compiling the same code with 6,000 lines of code, roughly, with the Kotlin Compiler version 1.9 and the Kotlin Compiler version 2.0. Let's start it. The execution is finished, so we should have our results now. It is very similar to what we would expect. Taking a look back at what I initially mentioned in the beginning of this video, remember that the old compiler is supposed to be able to compile roughly about 3,000 lines of code per second. We have 6,000 lines of code, so that would come about 2 seconds. We have 1.8, 1.7, 1.6 even. Maybe version 1.9 is a bit better by comparison with version 1.8. I wouldn't know. I would expect a bit more than 2 at this point. For the K2 compiler, though, it is exactly what we expected, because it is said that roughly around 6,000 lines of code will be compiled in 1 second with the new K2 compiler. It is a bit more, 1.3, 1.4, 1.3, 1.3, 1.3. It circles around 1 second, so this is exactly what we expected. With these numbers and with this small test, and of course this can vary with different code bases, especially if they depend on other libraries, but here I am personally convinced with the results. I would say that yes, K2 is more efficient, probably also simpler to understand. That's also one of the goals of the team, I understand. This is an experiment that you can do at home. You can use my code to improvise this benchmark or even create your own benchmark in your own GitHub repo. Feel free to use it. And if you reach other great conclusion about the new K2 compiler, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. This concludes our test drive for the new K2 Kotlin compiler. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe for this channel so that you don't miss the coming Coding in 5-minute sessions. And on the subject of performance, other things are important when we are building services. Like, for example, if our data is valid to put into our service. For that, we implement validations. And if you are interested in doing that via groups or just filtering out, I've made a full video about that you can look at right over here. As a short disclaimer, I'd like to mention that I'm not associated or affiliated with any of the brands eventually shown, displayed, or mentioned in this video.